All right, let's get rid of property taxes. They're talking about it. Have you seen this?
The Texas Senate Finance Committee crunched the numbers this week on what would happen if the state completely eliminated property taxes.
Nobody likes them. I don't like paying them. Some even argue they're unconstitutional.
Last time I checked, it's not in the Constitution.
But what if we got rid of them altogether? I mean, it sounds great. I mean, for my wallet anyways. Or does it? I mean, who's going to pay for the schools? Who's going to pay for the roads? This conversation comes up all the time during my live streams. And today we're going to be digging into all the solutions that you guys have come up with for eliminating property taxes. And we'll be exploring some different alternatives to maybe not completely eliminating property taxes. And you guys can give me your opinion at the end if you think that this is even a viable solution or if any of these are a viable solution. I mean, I want to make housing more affordable, but would these solutions make the problem even bigger? Let's explore.
Eliminated, Texans would somehow need to make up the deficit. One option would be to raise the sales tax, but in order to do that, Texas would have to triple its sales tax.
So one of the solutions that was proposed by Texas was to go ahead and increase the sales tax. So everybody across the board would be paying something. If you don't own property, you're not paying into this system that takes care of the roads and the schools. So they think this would be more fair. The problem is in Texas, if you had a sales tax of 6%, they said it would have to increase by, guess what, 22%. 22% in order to cover everything. And this would be a disadvantage to people that don't have a lot of money. They're income restricted because everything they would buy now would cost 22% more. So even though that sounds like a really great plan, it doesn't necessarily help everybody. I mean, you have to think about the elderly and how much they have income restrictions. It would disproportionately affect too many low-income families in order for that to work. But there's other things that people have suggested.
It's going to be good for taxpayers, and it's ultimately going to be good for students as well.
But there's other things people suggested, and this one could actually work, and that is the land value. So basically, you're not taxing the structure, you're only taxing the land. And if you think about it, all the corporations that owned that much land, then they finally got their, comeuppance. They had to pay in. I mean, a lot of high dollar people own a ton of land. If you don't know, in Oklahoma, one of the biggest landowners is this woman right here, the pioneer woman. And she had to pay a little bit more property taxes for all the land that she has swallowed up over the last, 20 years. You know what? It wouldn't hurt my feelings. It would encourage more land development, which we don't have. So it wouldn't be just land just sitting there raw. It would discourage a lot of land speculation, all the speculators that come out and just buy chunks of land from people. And it could be more equitable for all the taxes that they would collect on all that vacant land, because it'd be worth a lot more in taxes. The biggest disadvantage to this, though, is trying to get everybody on board and the complexity of how much actually would be having to be paid in those taxes. And all that land would have to be reassessed to find out actually how much they own. And a lot of these people have very old plat maps that aren't even up to date. And then you would have to find new meets and bounds. This is one of those things that they say they can't do, but for some reason they have no problem finding out if you put in a brand new shed in your backyard. A lot of the tax assessor's offices said it would be entirely too difficult to do this. But to me, it sounds like a cop-out. I think this is a good solution to the problem, but the opponents to this idea do not think it's a good idea, and they always shut it down. I think it's a good idea, but you let me know. But we have more to talk about.
It sounds great up front, but there's always an and what? Like at what cost?
Now, another solution that some people are really like, yay, we should do it. And others, like myself, don't think it's really necessarily a great idea. And that is to tax high income earners even more for local taxes because of the fact that they make the income. So now they should have to pay more into the tax system itself. And they could offset how much would be taken away from property taxes by taxing the rich people for what would be paid for in property taxes. I don't think that's a good idea, because what happens is this. If you happen to be extremely wealthy, we can all dream, and you are making, let's just say, $3 million a year, and you live in this town that is going to now charge you an excess amount because you've made all this extra money. What are you going to do? You're going to pack your bags and you're going to move somewhere else. There's no way you're going to pay extra because everybody else in the town can't afford to live there. You're more than happy to pay your fair share. Well, maybe not happy, But you will pay your fair share to live in that area, but you're not going to be paid extra or penalized because of the fact that you happen to be a lot of money. A lot of people hate the wealthy, but I mean, come on. If you had come into a bunch of money too, and then all of a sudden the town started knocking on your door saying, hey, you owe us a lot more in tax, that ain't going to slide. So then what happens is this, if all the rich people in the area move out, now who's going to pay? Who's going to pay for those roads? Who's going to pay for those schools? Not a great plan. I mean, you can, but they'll just leave.
I'm calling because I feel like they should not have property taxes for senior citizens.
That message you just heard was from my live stream. You can actually call into my live stream and leave your questions, and it fit in perfectly for this particular video. And our idea is one that has been passed around several times. Like, why don't we not charge older people property taxes? I want you to think about it like this, though. I mean, I know that sounds really good, but you would have to make sure that you had a disproportionate amount of older people to younger people, meaning that there would be less older people in that area than younger people. The elderly are not using the schools, but they're certainly using the roads and everything else. But that wouldn't necessarily work in a place like the Villages, for instance. Everybody that lives out there is retirement age, and they collect a lot of property taxes. There's no way that if all of a sudden they got rid of property taxes in that specific area, everything would crumble in no time. Now, I do like her idea, though, of maybe like freezing the taxes or eliminating taxes for injured veterans. That makes a lot of sense to me. I think there is an opportunity to be able to offset those costs. Right now, there's over 5 million service members that had a service-connected disability, and they're spread across the United States. So it makes sense to me to be either A, freeze their taxes, meaning that whatever they're paying now or whenever they paid when they bought that house is the price that they will pay for the life of that house until they die or sell that home. That makes sense to me. I think there's a possibility for that. And in some states that freeze your taxes, but I don't know of any states that totally eliminate property taxes altogether for the elderly or the disabled. But you know what? We can always check the old Google webs. So let's go do that and see if there is any.
One eternity later.
Well, we typed it in, and look, Alabama is the only state that offers total property tax exemption for seniors over 65. Alabama. All right, well, let's look at it. Are there any that don't property tax for the disabled? Louisiana. Yay! We're number one for something good. Veterans with 100% disability rating are fully exempt for property taxes. Veterans with a disability rating of 50% or more are take a partial exemption. Well, go Louisiana. It's rare we're on a good list for something.
Property taxes here in Florida could soon be a thing of the past.
But many are worried about how cities, counties, and even the state would cover those missing funds.
But property exemptions, also known as homestead exemptions, are not just unique just for veterans or the elderly. Most states have some kind of property exemption. They usually have an amount that you can exempt from your property taxes. Other states have some other version of their homestead exemption. And there are some qualifying matters. Like here in Louisiana, you have to actually take your closing documents when you close on your house to the tax assessor's office and file for homestead exemption. Find out if your state has a homestead exemption. And if you haven't filed it yet, go ahead and file it. Some states do it automatically. Not all do. Matter of fact, the person who bought our house never filed theirs, and it just so happened I was looking up some old records and I found out that he hadn't paid it, so I called him and let him know. Now, if you're filing this as yourself living in that home, you better make sure you live in that home. You can't do it for rental properties. That's how it works here in the state of Louisiana and some other states as well. Here's a little guide to all the states that do offer some kind of homestead exemption. Like I said, if you haven't filed it yet, go ahead and file it. And also find out if they have something called freezing your taxes if you're over the age of 65, because some areas do have this. So you might as well find out and use it if you can. And in the areas that I know that do have this, where you can freeze your taxes over the age of 65, that just means you freeze it at the date that you actually filed it. So if you're paying $3,000 a year for your property taxes, you will be paying the $3,000 for the rest of your remaining years. Now, if you go to sell that property, of course, the new buyer does not get that. I figured you already knew that, but I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Governor DeSantis floated the idea of getting rid of property taxes during an appearance in Tampa this week.
You know how, like, when you buy a car, you have the tax, title, and insurance, and then you sign on the dotted line. Now you own the car, and you don't have to pay it again until you buy another car. Well, Some have suggested doing this with real estate. So when you buy your house, you pay a lump sum for your property taxes, and then you have your tax title and you have in your house, and that's it. The problem with that is you can't do it that way. And mostly because of the fact that there is adjustments into the budget, like inflation happens, obviously, and you couldn't prepare for if there was a downturn in your real estate market, and then you wouldn't collect as much real estate taxes. It wouldn't really work for those property taxes as well. It's a great thought in like utopia land.
And utopia is?
But it's just not practical for eliminating property tax altogether. Not yet. But there could be some other ways. Some people have been pushing really hard for this idea, and that is to privatize public services. So you know how like toll roads work. So every time you get in the car and get out of your driveway, you just be paying fees. And basically they simplified this. You can have it like a reader in your car, and it would actually start tacking on how much you would use that road, and that would be your tax or property tax you would offset by doing this. That's one way. But the thing is, they also want to privatize public schools. And as crazy as that sounds, if you've turned on the news lately, you can understand and see how they are trying to privatize schooling as much as possible. So you could eliminate a good portion of property taxes if you went ahead and started to privatize public schools. The biggest disadvantage to this disproportionately affects people that are low income. Not everybody can afford a private school. And you know as well as I do that if they decide to do this, and let's just say schools cost $1,000 and they give you some kind of voucher for your kid to go to school, and now the school that used to be $1,000 is going to cost $2,000. And not everybody has that extra income to send their kids to private schools. Politicians love to privatize everything because it gets it out of their hands and they don't have to deal with it. But privatizing everything is not really working. Just look at the healthcare system. We've privatized the heck out of it and we're paying out the nose. Oh, and don't get me started on dental. But we're talking about housing. Does your state have a lottery? My state does. Several states do. And they're supposedly helping with the public schools. But our property taxes pay for those public schools. And some of those lottery jackpots are almost billions of dollars. I actually want to see the breakdown of how much lottery winnings actually do help public schools. Because something in my head says it's probably not all going to public schools. But a lot of states could adopt a lottery, basically, where everybody pitches in a little bit. So the possibility you could win a little bit more money, and then the state collects the other half. You would basically tax it. So let's just say if it was $500 million, half of that would go to the state and the other half would go to the winner. Of course, they would have to pay your federal taxes, and it wouldn't be $500 million anymore. Not even close. But it'd be a heck of a lot more than you had before you bought the lottery ticket in the first place. Some people have suggested that this would be a great way to offset property taxes. I agree, but they have to have a very transparent system. When it comes to government, they're about as transparent as this. Not very transparent.
You like to not have to pay property or state taxes.
A bill that would do just that is back in the legislature again.
All right, they're not transparent. And some people have suggested, why don't we just go ahead and start taxing corporations? They own a lot of business in the area, and they could easily pay a lot of those property taxes. Well, if you want to watch industry just scoot out of your state really quickly, start charging them a lot more in property taxes. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be paying their fair share. There's no doubt that they should be. Here in the state of Louisiana, corporations probably pay the least amount in taxes, but that was to encourage more corporations to come to the state so they could create more jobs. I don't know how successful that's been. That's for another video. But the thought was that it would shift the burden away from the individuals and put it back onto the corporations. But like I said, if that was the case, corporations would hightail it out of that state in a heartbeat. Think about all the corporations that have left California to go to Texas, mainly because of why? So they wouldn't be taxed as much. And you know as well as I do, corporate America isn't looking to help save America, make things easier for the individual. That's for darn sure. You want to know something interesting? And this will make sense with the property tax thing in just a second. Did you know that Elon Musk's cars don't necessarily make him that much money? Those Teslas aren't aren't the thing that brings him in the cash flow. It's actually selling carbon credits. That's where he makes the money. And that's the idea of kind of offsetting property tax. You start taxing the companies that produce the biggest carbon footprint. We would be totally screwed here in Louisiana. We have the most chemical plants. We do a bunch of oil refineries. That would not work. Those companies would hightail it out of here in a heartbeat. But the thought process behind it was that it would encourage corporations to be more energy efficient and not dump their pollution all over the place. I don't think this will work. I think this is like fairy tale thinking.
Life is not a fairy tale.
I would love for them to get their comeuppance because I really don't like the fact that they're polluting the environment like they are on a regular basis. But to tax them on that, that would take so much regulation. And nobody likes a bunch of regulation.
Drastic increases in their property tax assessments.
I want to make something really clear because some people don't realize that property taxes are not a federal thing. It's a local thing. In order to have your property taxes adjusted the way that you want them to, is you have to contact local officials. You have to show up to local meetings. And if you want to create big change, take some of these ideas and even some of your own to your local tax assessors meetings and see if maybe there's a possibility, because the biggest changes can happen right there, and it can start with property taxes. So let me know, are you going to bring this to your tax assessor? If you do, I'm begging you to bring your cell phone there. I want to see these videos. In the meantime, while I wait for those, why don't you go ahead and watch these videos right here? They're designed just for you. My name is Kristina Smallhorn, your real estate whisperer, and I tell you all this because good real estate information matters, and everybody deserves an affordable home.